Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by Louis Diez. Louis, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alexander. Thanks so much for having me here.
So, for those listeners who are hearing you for the first time, could you explain a bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, that's well. You warned me that you were going to ask me that question, and it's kind of a hard question. So I started out thinking I was going to be a musician. Studied a lot, played in professionally in an orchestra. Went from violin, to viola, which if anybody's into music, that's might see that as a step down. And I say that jokingly and lovingly. And then I ended up being a fundraiser, which is like, oh my goodness, the pits. So violinist to violist to fundraiser, 10 plus years of career in fundraising in the US, even though you might hear from my accent, I originally come from Spain. And mostly in annual giving, what here we call annual giving, but kind of direct response, mass marketing, and a little bit of major giving and campaign planning. I work mostly in higher ed institutions and educational institutions and cultural, so orchestras and such. Since a couple of months ago, I had started a fundraiser community that kind of took over my professional life. And it's been amazing. It's called the Donor Participation Project. And I transitioned into being a consultant, working with a fantastic company called Almabase. And number three, growing this community with 1,900 other fundraisers.
Awesome. So, I want to get into this donor participation project, but I'm curious to know that was a big switch between violin and fundraising. How did that pivot happen?
Well, I don't know exactly what the moment was, but I do remember being about to graduate. I was studying at that time in Tennessee, US, and applying for internships in New York City. I had a place to stay, and I got an internship at a cultural center called Lincoln Center. And the CEO at the time was kind of famous for his fundraising skills. So he was one of these CEOs that saw his job as being, at the very least 50%, if not more, a fundraising role, which is fantastic, right? You don't always get that. Sometimes you get people coming up from the program side, and fundraising is kind of, the dark side for them. So this guy was really inspirational. His name is Reynold Levy, and he kind of showed me, even though I was an intern there, how it all came together. So I was technical, and there's technical pieces of fundraising, as you well know, Alexander. There are people things. I had a background as an economist and in behavioral finance and behavioral research. And there's so much of that, especially if you go into the direct response. Like everything is an experiment if you think about it, or the digital marketing piece of things. And that's how I got started. Then I went back to school. I networked my way into an admin job in the alumni office. And I kind of went on from there, growing pretty rapidly from one position to the next. I went to Hopkins for a bit, then, Baltimore Symphony, another college, and yeah, now consulting.
And what was it about fundraising that you found so attractive? Because I've you're not the first person that I've heard that once they step into this industry, it's really hard to get out of, not because of desire, but because they want to actually stay in it. Like there's some kind of, I want to say, vortex or black hole that really sucks people in. They seem to enjoy what they do so much they don't want to actually leave. So was that something that you noticed as well? Or was there did you find your place, I guess is the question.
I found my place, but it took a lot of time. If I have to be honest with you, Alexander, it wasn't love at first sight. And it was at first a very pragmatic decision. Number one, it brought together a lot of my interests and skills, as I said, right? On technical, on kind of the more science research side, on the more outgoing sales, events type, thing, the marketing, the artistic. So it's kind of like a business, if I may use that word, where that kind of brings the whole world together, right? Whatever your interest is, there's a place there for you. I like that. But the career itself, there were dark times, and it's a tough industry, and people change jobs pretty quickly, and there's lots of transition and lots of chaotic environments. And I saw my good share of those too.
Yeah, we went through some tough times. I'm curious to know then, in terms of the donor participation project, so what was the motivating factors for creating that? Is it, I guess, an organization or a consulting agency? How would you define it exactly?
My goodness, you're asking all the hard questions. I would describe it as a fundraiser community. Essentially, what it is, it's a group of fundraisers that gets together every month. We get together on a Zoom call, and we have a guest speaker, and we talk about a topic related to donor participation, but really, widely. There can be tech things, there can be writing things, there can be engagement and community. So really, wide array of topics. From that, then, we're pretty active on LinkedIn. So we reflect about what we're learning. Then we meet in smaller groups. It's kind of like we had a good thing and it just, it just kept going and going. Then we started a conference, which was, pretty successful in April and May of this year of 2022. Now we're doing gaming, so video gaming fundraising course over September. And, I think, Alexander, to answer your question, we started it because I saw that there wasn't really a lot of advice out there that was geared towards it. So a lot of it was, either on the technology side, which is sometimes, lacking in fundraising insight. Then the fundraising advice was very much major gifts focused and campaign focused. There, I felt like there was a space there that was missing to talk about things like making our donors feel valued and seen, and how that impacts your revenue, because they stick with you, and then that builds trust, and then they end up in your major gifts pool. Does that answer your question?
It does. So you obviously produce a lot of content with the guest speakers talking about all these topics. Are these things publicly available? Do you need to join this community, or how does that work in terms of someone who's interested in learning more about it?
Anybody can join. It's a fairly simple, and the community itself is open to everybody. That's kind of one of our principles. You go to joindpp.org and you just sign up there with LinkedIn or your email or whatever. So one of the principles, the ideas, the values that we support, that we came up with, was that probably the innovations that are going to change the way we fundraise to make fundraising more participatory, more inclusive, more diverse, are going to come from somebody who's on the fringes, probably somebody that's not an established organization, somebody who doesn't have a huge development budget, somebody who doesn't look maybe like your traditional fundraiser. And when I say look, it's in, along any continuum that you can think of. And we wanted to make sure that those people felt included and had a voice.
And where do you normally source your guest speakers from? Is it just people who are volunteering, who offer their services to speak about a particular topic? Or do you have themes? This month we're going to talk about this particular topic versus next month we'll talk about something else.
Well, a lot of it is I'm talking with people almost all day, every day for sure. Not all day because I actually have work to do, but, every day I'm speaking with fundraisers, with people that are researching, with really interesting people. I mean, just today, I spoke with the gentleman who leads innovation efforts at UNICEF. Amazing what they're doing. I mean, they have like 25. They kind of run it like venture capitalists. So they invest in lots of projects and then they see what works and what doesn't. So I'm just out there talking with people, and a lot of it is really, do I feel it's interesting and aligned with the point we're trying to make.
So you got the speakers you mentioned. You talk a bit about tech. You talk about community and writing. Is there a particular service or activity that the donor participation project does? Like, is it just a matter of just sharing information and learning from others, or are there additional services that if they wanted to deep dive, if, for example, a nonprofit wanted to learn a bit more about one particular aspect, is there a course that is offered or a direction that you can guide them in to get them the more information that they might need?
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. And you mentioned those three areas. There's a lot more. We even talk about major gifts and engagement that leads to major gifts. So I invite anybody who's interested to just type joindpp.org and check out our past sessions. But to answer your question, the community is open to everybody. We want to turn this into a really safe, valuable place to exchange ideas. I'm obviously a consultant. Other members can be consultants. We have very clear culture and values document. So everybody who's in the community kind of commits to sharing value. rather than just kind of trying to harvest emails. It's a high signal place, but if people want to do additional direct response work, I do something called a data diagnostic that helps nonprofits identify their strengths and their weaknesses and their opportunities around generating sustainable revenue. So, and that's me as a consultant individually, and trainings and stuff like that. I would say that that's kind of the next level for anybody who's interested. And then we have courses, some of which have a fee, some of which are sponsored. And, the principle there is, for the most part, we're pretty open to. We usually have scholarships. So, but, we try to collect a fee to pay our speakers, which we feel is important from an equity perspective, so that you just don't get people speaking who can afford to speak for free.
I like the comment you made about high signal, because I use that expression to signal to noise. I'm not sure if it comes from the tech world or the engineering world, but I like it as well. So it's great, and then it is difficult to balance, like you said, wanting to give all this great information out for free and not have everybody just harvesting emails. And it must be difficult to moderate that kind of balance. But that's awesome.
We've been pretty lucky. At first, I was kind of an extremist about not having people that weren't practicing fundraisers in the group. Over time, I realized I had a colleague who's also a technology consultant, and she was a member of a steering committee that we did for the conference. We have another gentleman that's a product manager. So he's in tech, but he's also been a fundraiser in the past. And he's actually teaching one of the classes in the video gaming and streaming esports fundraising course. So I realized that there's people that have tons of value to add, and that as long as we understand the rules of engagement and we're all committed and happy with them, why not? Nobody's more or less valuable than anybody else.
That's a really good segue to this gamification, because you said esports or e-gaming. Is that different than gamification? And if it is, what are the differences?
Yes. So I think gamification is, you probably know more about this than I do, Alexander, but gamification is adding game-like elements to activities, right? So imagine if you have a platform, they do gamification and they give you points and banners, and if you comment 3 times, you get a badge, things like that. What we're looking into is fundraising through communities that gather online around video games, around streaming, and around esports. So I think maybe some of your listeners have been on Twitch or follow somebody in any of the other streaming platforms, any creator, and they're nonprofits that are raising serious amounts of money this way. I'd say it's not kind of the be-all, end-all of fundraising, but we thought it was worthwhile looking into. So that's what we're doing next month.
This is the first time I've ever heard of something like this. Can you explain that a bit further? How would you leverage Twitch or esports and gamers to help with donations and fundraising?
Oh my goodness. So I would say that so even if you haven't heard about it, this is kind of what happened to me. I was exactly in your situation, Alexander, where I was coming at this from the outside, right? And the first thing that surprised me is how pervasive and how many people are involved in this. So like, Alexander, if you have like a newsletter or a list, I'd kind of invite you to just ask, like, who follows somebody on Twitch, or who's given to a creator. But essentially what it is these creators have their communities, and I call them communities because they really do interact and they get to know each other over time. And they're like little groups of people that are really tight knit. And many of them do this full time. So they're full-time creators. And one of our presenters, instructors in the course, actually was a Twitch streamer professionally for a while. And now he works at St. Baldrick's Foundation. And he's part of a team that's building up the gaming fundraising program. So what they do is they're on there and they do regular broadcasts, and people follow them and they interact with the audience through chat mostly. And then when they do a fundraiser, the nonprofits give them materials and support and manage that relationship the same way they manage other volunteers, so that they can hold a fundraiser for the nonprofit. Some of these events fundraise for several different nonprofits and can raise millions of dollars.
Wow. This is you're blowing my mind here. I mean, I used to be a gamer back in the day. in the earlier days, I mean, of course, it wasn't streamed, but those kinds of games you play either by yourself or on the internet. And for me, it's a big shift to being able to use that in terms of fundraising. It's awesome to connect those two worlds. I'm learning something for the first time today.
That's great. And that's exactly what we're trying to go for is lots of people play video games. There's a statistic that says that in the US, I don't know if that's North America, but in the US, 2/3 of people at least have played a video game, and globally, at least half the population. So I'm kind of joking that this is the most fun you can have at work while saying you're doing professional development.
Yeah, there was something to be said back in the day where if you can get paid to play games, you've made it. Like that's the ultimate career you could ever have.
Yeah, totally. I'll try to send you a link for one of these gaming events.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Thank you. So shifting topics a little bit, there was a podcast that I listened to of yours a few weeks ago that you talked about certain trends in donors and donor participation. And then especially there was a national-wide or nationwide decline in donors in, I think it was 6 years, over 2010 to 2016, if I remember correctly. And there was a lot of data you presented in that podcast, in the seminar. I was curious to know, where you gathered this data from, and a bit more, if you could deep dive a bit more about that report and what you saw in that report.
Absolutely. So when I talk about this and people, say, prove it, my answer is usually, I don't know that we can prove anything definitely, but I just see a lot of indicators that are pointing in the same direction. So it's kind of like a preponderance of evidence approach, right? I've seen it, number one, in my career, where the donors down, dollars up has been kind of the trend in every nonprofit I've been. We've been able to some extent turn that around sometimes, but the overall trend has been there. So I've lived through it. In the States, there's lots of benchmarking, Giving USA, the Lilly School of Philanthropy, the VSE benchmark for higher education, voluntary supportive education. All of those show declines in the number of people giving. And that time frame you shared, in fact, that was a resource I had, but the stretch is really much larger. It's from sometime around the 90s, mid to late 90s to today. So it's been an overall decline in the number of people giving to nonprofit organizations. So that means that there used to be like 2/3 of the US population. And I'm sorry that I don't have the data for Canada, but it used to be about 2/3 of the US population who made a gift to a nonprofit every year. That's under half now. And if you think of that, that's, many millions of people who used to give every year who don't anymore.
And were there reasons for this trend? I mean, is it a matter of inflation? Is it a matter of cost of living? Is it a matter of salaries? Where would be the root cause or the root causes of this decline?
I love how you think out like an engineer, Alex. I actually work with engineers now at Almabase, and I'm loving every second of it. So, if we solve this question on this podcast, we'd probably, get some prize money from somewhere. I see a lot of trends that are converging in ways that impact this negatively. Number one, wealth inequality, right? So the hollowing of the middle class. Top of the wealth pyramid has a much larger percentage of the total wealth, and then the bottom is kind of falling out. So that's one problem. Another problem is the decline in trust in institutions generally, and nonprofits, universities, media, NGOs as a part of that. So there's a very famous study that comes out every year, the Edelman Trust Barometer, and it has shown a decline in trust over the years in government and nonprofits. So think of this like your personal perspective. It used to be that what your university said or what your professor said or your doctor said was kind of the definitive word, right? And when they published something or when something went out in the news, you picked up your newspaper and that was reality. Now that's no longer the case. Facts are contested, improper behavior gets revealed through social media. There is just a totally different information landscape. So I think that's I don't know if I'm at 3 or 4 now, but the last one is the sources of information have exploded through social media. And maybe you have that stat, Alexander, like the amount of data that's created and information every second is like ginormous, terabytes and terabytes of information, and it's grown exponentially. So, I mean, what that has meant is that if your donors thought that you were going to tell them something, and that was going to be the truth about your nonprofit organization, that's no longer the case. They are talking among each other on social media. They are contesting what you say. And if you're not there, they are making up their own minds, or they're getting distracted by other, you're no longer top of mind for them. So between all of that, I think it kind of makes sense that there are fewer people giving to nonprofits. That doesn't mean there are fewer people giving in general. So we see these online creators that are raising enormous amounts of money, and we see other types of peer-to-peer and direct giving that is happening.
So if I were to summarize, wealth inequality, decline in trust, facts are being contested, and then just multiple sources of information. But how does that last one fit in? Because I understand that, yes, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge being produced every second. And actually, one key element these days in being a good consultant is being able to aggregate this information and making it more digestible for people to understand.
Yep.
And filtering out and knowing what to listen to, what not to listen to, the signal to noise that we mentioned earlier. So is that one actually, I mean, out of those four, the only one that I can see a nonprofit actually having an impact toward would be the decline in trust. That's the only one that they, out of these four motivations or reasons, is the only one a nonprofit might be able to influence, because the other three are beyond their control. Would you agree, or is there something that can be done for the other three as well?
Well, that's kind of the whole impulse of the Donor Participation Project, which is, whether we know it or not, our fundraising practices are based in that old world of high trust environment, and we have to adjust our practices to change things like trust. So McKinsey has a great trust, they call it an equation. It sounds more scientific, right? But they break down what trust is made up of. Okay. So there are components in there that nonprofits can influence. So McKinsey says trust is made up of credibility. So you can do things to become more credible, right? And Alexander, you as a nonprofit, as a consultant, right? Or both of us, you can do things to become more credible as the subject matter expert. Then reliability. So when you're asked to do something, when there's an emergency in the world, when a donor asks for something, how reliable are you? And donors are forming an expectation, and that's impacting your trust. Think of, it's almost a joke now, right? You call a nonprofit and you never get a call back. There's a perception, whether it's true or not, of a lack of reliability. And then intimacy. So does this person, nonprofit organization, are they like me? People tend to try to, like to give to people like them. And then the last factor is self-orientation, which is, and this goes against trust. So the more self-oriented, like the more self-interested you appear to be, the less people trust you. Like imagine a doctor, you may understand they're earning a living, but how are they going to recommend a course of treatment that's against your interests, And if you believe that, then you're not going to trust them. And if you think that they preeminently care about you, then you are going to trust them. So how many times do we hear about nonprofits? Yeah, they only show up for the money. That's really going against trust. They're saying, well, they only care about themselves. They don't care about me. So yes, I think there are lots of things that nonprofit can do about it. I just think they're focused on doing things that used to work in a previous model.
Yeah, that trust equation is a key element, and I think it applies to not just, of course, nonprofits, but anybody, either individually or as an organization.
Totally.
So going back to those 4 points, that was the decline in trust. The other three, would you agree that there's not much the nonprofit can do? The wealth inequality, the fact that facts are now contested, and that there are multiple sources of info. Would you say that those three, that these are beyond the scope of a nonprofit to change, or is there something that they can do to somehow combat these 4 reasons?
My goodness, you're asking amazing questions, Alexander. So, okay, wealth inequality, that's just the world, right? I'm not sure, other than moving money around with nonprofits. So that, yes, I would say that's an external factor. The information landscape, and I think those two, really 3 and 4, are maybe kind of the same thing, right? So it's the information landscape has changed, has exploded the number of available sources of info and possibilities for connection. which means that facts are contested, and people have conversations about things. They don't just accept things anymore. I think, and we talk about this a lot in the DPP and in my consulting practice, there's definitely things in the way nonprofits communicate that can help this. And a lot of it is, I like to think of as a framework, thinking of more community building than marketing. Okay, so, and I define community building as when you get people together in ways that are participatory, purposeful, recurring, and identify leaders. So if you communicate in those ways, so you want to communicate in ways that are participatory, so there's a two-way conversation. You're asking for thoughts. You're not just saying, we achieved this, we're great. Maybe you're asking for people's thoughts. Maybe you're asking for input about the future direction of the organization. So it's purposeful. So lots of times nonprofits communicate about a ton of just different things, especially large ones, right? And for donors, that loses the purpose is kind of lost in the middle. Okay, but are you a research organization? But are you even a nonprofit? There's research that shows that many university and healthcare and museum constituents don't even know that they are nonprofits. Okay, so we lose the purpose, and then recurring. I have a whole model for this, but I do think that the communications can be significantly improved.
It's all about relationships, and it's all about community. I think that's the key element, and it's a part that we can really have the biggest impact over. So I totally agree. It's
Yeah.
sometimes harder to build. It's maybe organic in terms of growth, but once you get there, once your community is strong and vibrant, I mean, it's a rich well of information, of trust, of, like you said, feeling like you're all part of the same group, but also
And
very inclusive as well, and welcoming new ideas, new thoughts as well, because you don't want to just be what is that called? Not a sounding board, but
like the sage from the stage model, right? Where you have the expert and everybody's supposed to shut up and just accept what they say. I mean, that model just works less and less well.
Echo chamber. That's the word I was looking for.
There
You
you
want to
go.
be an echo chamber. You want to be able to invite new ideas, new ways of introducing new trends or
Yeah.
new ways of doing things, but at the same time having a sense of connection.
And we say this all the time, Alexander. We say fundraising is about relationships, yada, yada, yada. What does that even mean? And like from a CRM perspective, you see that, and okay, if there's a relationship, there have to be, back and forth conversations happening that are recorded. There, especially if it's multi-channel, right? So there's conversations happening, and if you have a really good relationship with somebody, you give them a call, you send them a text message. Think of your family, right? You're all over every channel, really, and you interact quite a lot. So then nonprofits, a lot of the time, say, oh, fundraising is all about relationships. But when you look at the data in the CRM, they're not having enough of these interactions with their constituents. And nowadays with technology, that's another kind of part of what we talk about in the donor participation project, is that technology has made it possible to have many more of these relationships. I hate to use the word at scale, but with many more people.
Since you opened the door for CRM, which is my favorite door to go through, I'm curious to know your perspective on things, because obviously we're talking a lot about guidelines and ways we can improve and connect, but there is some elements, some technologies that most nonprofits can benefit from, whether it's a CRM or elsewhere, that are fundamental to being connected, to making sure that keep track of the donor, to have that 360 perspective on a particular person. So from your perspective, what do you think are the most important elements of technology, or what are the most important technologies, I should say? Is CRM one of them? And does it need to be complicated? Can it be simple? We talked a bit about, even something as simple as Google Chat or Google Contacts, for example, could be one version of a CRM that can work for some nonprofits.
Well, so I would say you definitely need some form of contact management, right? I think smaller nonprofits very often are over-engineered in that sense. So they get sold solutions that are too much. And if you have the right framework and the right fundraising concepts, and you know what you're looking for, I mean, my point in our pre-show conversation, Alexander, was that you can get pretty far if you know what you're going after. And, it can be a Google Sheet, it can be Airtable. Of course, definitely there. This is a breaking point that where this thing breaks. These types of things break very soon, and you need to go into a Salesforce, into a Blackbaud, any other system, Virtuous. But kind of, I'd love for people to lead with what is the fundraising goal, the fundraising idea, that I need, the model that I want to implement, and then look at solutions for that.
That makes sense. You have to keep your tech in balance with what you're trying to achieve and who you are today. If you don't want to overreach yourself and invest all this great or invest so much that you are overwhelming yourself, you want to make sure that it's in balance with what you're capable of maintaining and working with. That's a good point.
Yeah, totally. And you're a much bigger expert than I am in this area, but I feel like also, especially smaller nonprofits, they invest in the setting up or the first investment, let's say, but they forget about maintenance. And that's also why I like no code tools and things like that, because it makes it really easy to, okay, this worked for a while, it's not working anymore. It's normal. This evolution is normal. So let's change it. And you can change it pretty quickly. But if you don't budget for that, you get stuck with like bad solutions or kind of a hodgepodge of setups. I'm sure you've seen your fair share of horror stories.
Yes, definitely. I've definitely it happens from time to time. I'm curious to know, what does the future of the donor participation project look like? Where would you like to take this organization?
That's a really good question. I feel like we are on a fantastic growth path. We're generating super valuable projects. Hopefully, hopefully people share this view, and it's going to spin off lots of very interesting projects, both for myself personally and for each other. Just other things that we're working on, that we're in secret phase right now. Is we're working on a project to offer pro bono consulting, pro bono specific fundraising consulting projects for nonprofits, kind of smaller scope than what you'd hire a consultant for. But we're working on a project to be able to do that with members of our community who are, wicked smart, and we're working on all types of kind of spin-offs. So for now, as long as it's scalable, I'd love to keep it going the way it is and probably give it a little bit more structure if we eventually reach a point of self-sustenance. Have people that are remunerated for their work. We're like an open source software project. And at some point, you actually do need somebody kind of making sure everything is connected. And, it feels like we're going to get there pretty soon.
And in terms of donor participation in general, and in the future, like integrating these cool ideas like the game part, do you see anything in the near future that could be interesting to look at? Some people talk, of course, about NFTs and Bitcoin and that kind of stuff. Do you see other elements that could be interesting, or just beyond the horizon that we don't quite reach today, but maybe we'll reach in some time soon?
So where my money is, if I had to make a guess,
if you were a betting man, yeah.
Yeah, community-led growth, just like software companies are looking at a community-led business model. I think the nonprofits that want to grow will need to do that. And that's a little bit of what drives my personal interest in other things. So for instance, you've mentioned NFTs, crypto philanthropy. Lots of people get set up to receive these gifts and don't even have one donor, let alone a community of donors that are interested in this, So as long as if you're starting from a community-led perspective, I think, things can work or not work. That's why I liked the gaming perspective, even though a lot of those relationships are with the content creators, not necessarily with the nonprofit. So, still work to do there. I think no code and things like marketing automation, stewardship automation, again, not just willy-nilly, but having a sense of what the fundraising principles are behind what you're doing. But I think that has tremendous potential, right? So to kick off automations, and Alexander, I understand you work in the Salesforce ecosystem, right? Based on things that happen in Salesforce, kick off automations based on that will make your donors feel seen, feel valued with the same staff that you have, because kind of that's the reality and the world that most of us live in the nonprofit world, right? The fundraising staff isn't going to grow exponentially, and especially your donor relations and your stewardship staff. So, community-led growth and no code, are areas that I think lots of nonprofits could benefit from.
What does no code mean to you?
Oh my goodness! And you're asking me. You're an engineer. It's my understanding is that it's a approach to software that lets people set up systems, processes, automations without needing to know how to program the underlying code. So kind of like click and play tools that let you do things like this are Zapier, or however you pronounce it, Zapier. And that lets you connect your different tools that you have and have them do things based on triggers. So for instance, a new donation comes in. You connect that in through that tool called Zapier with a vendor that lets you send out an automated postcard, a personalized automated postcard with the donor's name on it. So every time a gift comes in, that postcard gets put in the mail automatically. And you can do that without writing code, which is, it's amazing. There's another no-code tool called Glide, which lets you program an app, which I'm not saying nonprofits need apps, but, if you wanted one or needed one for a conference or something like that, you could do it without needing to know how to program.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you just gave a better explanation for what that is than I would ever give. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm a totally, I'm a little bit technical from interest, but not by career. So I'm just totally, from a user perspective.
Oh, and it's great. I'm always curious to see and hear other people's perspectives, because there are different elements and ways of looking at it. But I think the way you define it would be the way that I would try to define it as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Alexander.
Louis, this has been great. Where can people find more about you online?
Well, pretty active on LinkedIn. I think that's kind of where we indirectly connected. So you connected with David, who was on your podcast, and I know David from LinkedIn. David Fu, a great video guy for nonprofits. So LinkedIn, just look me up, Louis Diez, and the Donor Participation Project website has my contact info. It's joindpp.org. That's about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Alexander. It was great. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.